All right, you know what that is. That's the top of the stairs at Elvis's Graceland. How many of us want to walk up those stairs and take that corner, but that's never going to happen.
For nearly 50 years, one room inside Elvis Presley's mansion stayed sealed shut, and not even his own family had ever stepped inside. When it was finally opened, what waited behind that door wasn't old photographs or forgotten stage costumes.
We're going to show you things that you did not know existed, kind of hidden Graceland things,
Ooh.
Little gems of information and items that you might have never known were actually here in the house.
It was something so personal, so intimate, that the people who found it went completely silent. What was hidden inside Elvis Presley's mansion for almost half a century, and why did his family choose to keep it buried for so long? A house with one locked door. Graceland was never just a home. From the moment Elvis Presley bought the property in 1957, it became an extension of who he was. A place built for a life lived loudly in front of the whole world. There was a meditation garden where he went to think in private, a jungle room with shag carpet climbing the walls, a basement television room where he could watch 3 shows at once, and grounds wild enough to include a chimpanzee named Scatter, who Elvis dressed in tiny outfits and brought along to parties. It was a house full of noise, color, and life. But by August of 1977, that same house would hold something it was never designed for. A locked room nobody was allowed to enter, and a silence that would last decades. Elvis died in an upstairs bathroom on August 16, 1977. Within days, nearly 100,000 grieving fans packed the streets of Memphis, lining the roads and weeping outside the gates just for a chance to say goodbye. Inside the mansion, he lay in a white suit and blue shirt, and those who saw him that way never forgot it. On August 18th, a procession of 17 white Cadillacs carried him through the city, past famous faces like James Brown, Sammy Davis Jr., and Caroline Kennedy, alongside Priscilla Presley, 9-year-old Lisa Marie, and Elvis's heartbroken father, Vernon. He was buried beside his mother, Gladys, at Forest Hill Cemetery. His family hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Only 2 days later, a group of men broke into the cemetery in the dead of night and tried to steal Elvis's coffin. They failed, but they damaged the tomb before they were caught, and the message was unmistakable. Even in death, he wasn't safe. Vernon Presley, already devastated, wasn't willing to risk it happening again. Quietly, with police assistance, he had Elvis and Gladys moved and reburied inside the meditation garden at Graceland, the peaceful spot Elvis had built for himself years earlier. That decision changed the house forever. Vernon added new security, hired round-the-clock guards, and sealed off the entire second floor, including the attic above it. The official reason was privacy. But as the years went on, fewer people believed that was the whole story. When Graceland opened to the public in 1982, tourists could finally walk through the kitchen, admire the stained glass windows, and stand quietly at Elvis's grave. But the staircase to the second floor stayed roped off, and the attic door never opened. Not for fans, not for journalists, not even for world leaders. Tour guides gave the same answer for decades. The upstairs is private, out of respect for the family. And for 48 years, that was enough to keep people from asking too many questions. But behind that locked door wasn't the only thing the Presley family had chosen not to talk about. There was another secret, one that had nothing to do with dusty boxes or old furniture, the real story of how the king of rock and roll actually died, and just how far people were willing to go to keep the public from knowing it. The secret behind the story. The official cause of death, announced hours after Elvis passed, was cardiac arrhythmia. His heart had simply stopped. Natural causes, the medical examiner told reporters. Case closed. But almost immediately that explanation started to unravel. Even at the time, people could see how much Elvis had changed. The lean electric performer of the 1950s had ballooned to nearly 260 pounds. His shows had grown unpredictable, forgotten lyrics, rambling between songs, moments where he could barely stay upright without help. It was a far cry from the young man who had once electrified American television and terrified parents across the country with a single hip movement. The autopsy told a darker story behind the scenes: an enlarged heart, a swollen liver, and damage consistent with years of heavy prescription use. The toxicology report, released later, revealed dangerously high levels of powerful drugs and His system, drugs prescribed not by a stranger, but by his own personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, known to almost everyone simply as Dr. Nick. In just the final 8 months of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick had written prescriptions for more than 10,000 pills. The year before hadn't been much better, nearly 19,000 pills prescribed in 1976 alone. Investigators later calculated that in those final 8 months, Elvis received 195 separate prescriptions, roughly one every day and a half. Dr. Nick always had an explanation ready: chronic pain from an old army injury, severe glaucoma, a painful intestinal condition, insisting the medication was treatment, not indulgence. His most striking defense came later, when he claimed he was actually protecting Elvis, supplying the drugs under supervision so he wouldn't seek them elsewhere, from someone with far less caution. If I hadn't given them to him, he would have gotten them somewhere else, he told medical review boards. But the man behind that explanation was unraveling in real time. Elvis would stay awake for days on stimulants, then knock himself unconscious with sedatives just to sleep. On his final day alive, he followed that same pattern one last time, playing racquetball in the early morning before returning to bed with more pills. His heart, already strained by years of weight and dependency, simply gave out. Tennessee authorities eventually charged Dr. Nick with 14 counts of overprescribing, not just to Elvis, but to other patients as well. A jury acquitted him. But the scrutiny didn't end there. It took until 1995, 18 years after Elvis's death, for the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners to finally strip him of his license for good. By then, the conversation around Elvis's death had already split into two very different camps. One side saw a man enabled by the very people paid to protect him, a doctor who kept writing prescriptions long after the warning signs were impossible to ignore. The other side wondered whether the real failure wasn't excess at all, but a diagnosis nobody caught in time. In 2020, that second theory gained new weight when author Sally Hodel argued in her book that Elvis may have carried an undiagnosed genetic disorder all along, something affecting his lungs and liver, paired with a weakened immune system that could explain the years of illness so many had written off as simple excess. If she's right, some of those hospital visits everyone assumed were about pills may have been genuine medical emergencies the doctors around him never fully understood. So, which version is true? A man lost to addiction, or a man quietly fighting a disease no one around him fully understood? Even now, nobody can say for certain. And that uncertainty is exactly why so many people started to wonder what else the Presley family might be sitting on, locked away behind closed doors, waiting for the right moment to come out. If you're starting to sense that Graceland has been holding on to more than anyone realized, you're right. And the next chapter of this story is what finally forced that secret into the light. Before we get there, if you want to see exactly what was found the moment that attic door opened, make sure you're subscribed, because what's coming next is unlike anything this house has ever revealed. The fight that unlocked the door. For decades, nothing forced the Presley family's hand. The rumors persisted, the theories multiplied, but the attic stayed shut. That changed in the spring of 2024, when a company almost nobody had heard of, Nasani Investments and Private Lending LLC, filed paperwork to auction off Graceland itself, the most famous rock and roll landmark in the world. Court records claimed Riley Keough, Elvis's granddaughter and the sole heir to his estate after Lisa Marie Presley's death in 2023, had defaulted on a loan worth $3.8 million. The news came out of nowhere, and even the most devoted fans, the kind who track every detail of Elvis's legacy, were caught completely off guard. Fan pages and forums filled almost instantly with confusion and panic. Riley's legal team moved fast, filing an emergency motion in Shelby County, Tennessee, arguing that the entire claim was fabricated, that Riley had never signed anything with the company, and that the signatures looked forged, like someone had faked her name just to seize control of the estate. With the auction date already set, there was almost no time left. One day before the scheduled sale, a Tennessee judge halted it entirely, calling Graceland a one-of-a-kind cultural asset whose loss would harm the public. No one from the company even showed up to argue otherwise, and the ruling went through unopposed. The house stayed in Presley hands. But the scare had done something the previous 47 years hadn't. It had put a deadline on the question everyone in the family had quietly avoided. What happens to everything inside this house, including the parts nobody has ever seen, if it's suddenly out of our control? Riley Keough had grown up hearing about the attic the way most people hear about a family story, too painful to fully explain, present, but untouched. Her mother, Lisa Marie, had known what was up there and had chosen for her entire life to honor her father's privacy rather than satisfy anyone's curiosity, including her own daughter's. After Lisa Marie's death, that choice fell to Riley alone, and for months she reportedly went back and forth, unsure whether opening it was an act of preservation or an act of trespassing on something her grandfather never meant for anyone to find. In the end, it wasn't idle curiosity that moved her. It was the fear of almost losing the house altogether, and the realization that if she didn't decide what happened to that room, someone else eventually might. So, she made the call. For the first time since 1977, someone was going upstairs. The door opens. On a cold January morning in 2025, a small team of archivists in white gloves climbed the narrow staircase leading to Graceland's attic. Their footsteps echoed through a space no one had entered in almost 50 years. Under a single bare bulb, the lead archivist turned an old brass key that had stayed in the Presley family since Elvis's death. The door creaked open, and as light spilled in for the first time in nearly half a century, everyone in the room fell silent. This wasn't a forgotten storage space. The room stretched across the entire top floor of the house, with dormer windows covered by heavy blackout curtains and a small air conditioner that had somehow kept running for nearly 50 years without anyone realizing it. Along one wall sat dozens of boxes arranged into a carefully organized timeline, each one labeled in Elvis's own handwriting. Tupelo, 1945. First recordings, Army Days, Hollywood, Vegas. One box, set apart from the rest, was simply marked after, dated 1977, the year he died. In the Tupelo section sat a worn teddy bear, missing an eye, held together with patches. Family records identified it as Bear, Elvis's favorite childhood toy, from the years his family lived in poverty. His mother, Gladys, had stitched those patches herself from scraps of her own clothing, faded floral patterns still visible on its chest. When Vernon was jailed in 1938 for writing bad checks, leaving Gladys and young Elvis with almost nothing, Bear had been the one constant Elvis held onto. In the Army Days box was a Bible with a spine held together by electrical tape from decades of handling. It had belonged to Gladys, who gave it to Elvis when he enlisted in 1958. Along with a note urging him to keep his faith. Inside, he had underlined passages and scrawled his own private notes for nearly 20 years. Questions, thoughts, small prayers. One of the last entries, dated just days before his death, marked Psalm 23. Also inside that box was a leather-bound yearbook from Humes High School in Memphis. Elvis rarely signed classmates' yearbooks. He was shy, often teased for his clothes and unusual style. But this one was full of messages from classmates, many encouraging. One simply read, "Keep singing, Elvis, you're going places." Elsewhere in the attic, archivists found a leather jacket from Jailhouse Rock, with a handwritten note tucked into the pocket. "Wear this when you need to disappear." Nearby sat a stack of books on Eastern philosophy and mortality, heavily annotated in the margins, the private reading of a man quietly searching for answers far beyond the image most fans knew him by. And in the Vegas box, a doctor's report from 1974, stamped confidential, referencing serious heart concerns and recommending significant lifestyle changes. Elvis performed for 3 more years after receiving it. None of it looked like a man hiding a secret escape or building some elaborate cover story. It looked like a man who sensed his time was limited and who had spent years quietly deciding, piece by piece, how the world would eventually come to understand him. The Voice in the Dark. Among the boxes were reel-to-reel tapes labeled simply Practice Sessions 1976, raw, unreleased recordings of Elvis alone, blending gospel, blues, and even early electronic sounds, still experimenting creatively even as everything else around him was falling apart. Then came the recording that stopped the room cold, a stripped-down version of Unchained Melody, just his voice, recorded only months before he died. It wasn't polished. His voice cracked in places it never had before. But that imperfection was exactly what made it devastating. One music historian later described it as though Elvis were confronting his own mortality through the song itself, every broken note carrying something unmistakably real. Scattered among the tapes were lyrics scrawled on napkins and hotel stationery, some lines crossed out and rewritten, others just fragments and private notes to himself, including alternate lines for suspicious minds that never made the final recording, a rare, unfiltered look at how his mind actually worked when no one else was watching. But it was a stack of unopened fan letters that hit the archivists hardest, still sealed, exactly as they had arrived decades earlier. Letters from soldiers thanking him for lifting their spirits overseas. Letters from families describing how his music carried them through hard times. Letters from young musicians asking for advice. One letter, postmarked in 1976, quietly begged him to take a break from touring and take care of his health. It was never opened. There's no way to know whether reading it would have changed anything at all, but the weight of that unopened envelope was enough to silence an entire room of professionals used to handling history for a living. What the attic really held. Taken together, these discoveries told a far richer story than any biography ever had. A man capable of reshaping American music while still holding on to a childhood teddy bear. A man who saved every letter from strangers, even while quietly falling apart behind closed doors. A man still chasing new sound, new meaning, new understanding, right up until the very end. For many fans, that brought something close to peace. Nothing in that attic was random. It had all been kept on purpose, as if some part of him wanted these pieces to remain exactly where they were, protected inside the one house that never stopped being his. For others, the mystery only deepened. Why keep something this personal hidden for nearly 50 years? What else might still be sitting somewhere inside that house, waiting? Some wonder whether other boxes remain unopened, still marked in Elvis's own hand, still off limits even now. Others simply wonder what it says about a man that, even while the whole world was watching him, he was quietly setting aside the pieces of himself no one was ever meant to see until he was gone. In 2018, Elvis received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one more marker of everything he changed in American culture. But maybe his real legacy was never in the medals or the gold records at all. Maybe it was sitting quietly in a sealed attic the entire time, in a box marked after, waiting for someone in his family to finally decide he was ready to be understood, not as the king, but as the man who kept a teddy bear, underlined a Bible, and left a version of Unchained Melody that says more about him than any interview ever did. If this is the version of Elvis you never got to know, that's exactly why this story deserved to be told in full. And if it moved you the way it moved the people who opened that door, stay subscribed, because there are more rooms like this one still waiting to be found.